Today, I'll be sharing with you a historically accurate menu and meal plan from World War I that I dug up in the archives. Due to our own current circumstances with the high cost of living and inflation, I thought there's no better time to see how other people made it through hard times. And to be honest, I was quite surprised by these meal plans. The information that I'm sharing today will be linked down below, and you can check it out in the archives if you're interested. Something that I found very interesting in these meal plans is that there was two sections. One for the higher class that has no restrictions on budget, and one for the lower class who has a limited budget. Today we'll be focusing on the diet for the higher class. I'm starting out today with a recipe for stewed prunes. We start out by soaking the prunes in water for a minimum of 2 hours. And then the prunes and their soaking liquid are going to go into this pot. We're going to get it up to a boil and then down to a simmer. I'm also going to start some oatmeal. The general plan of meals for breakfast include fruit, cereal, bread in some form, coffee or other beverage, and eggs if desired. I decided on oatmeal with stewed prunes, bread and butter, and tea or coffee for my breakfast. The Food Administration asked everyone to maintain rigidly a minimum of at least one wheatless day per week, which is meant to be on Wednesday, one meatless day per week, which is meant to be Tuesday, and one porkless day each week, which is Saturday. Today is Tuesday, so we are doing a meatless day, and I'm making a Boston roast, which is a bean loaf. And so I'm getting this going in my slow cooker, and I'm adding a bay leaf for extra flavor. I'm using about a teaspoon of molasses to flavor the prunes, and I'm doing this instead of using sugar, because it was suggested to reduce the amount of sugar used by substituting with either molasses, honey, or corn syrup. My daughter and I baked this bread yesterday, and it is a wheat-based bread that we ground ourselves. However, during World War I, the main crop that was scarce was wheat. And so they asked to substitute flour or meal made from any other grain for at least 1/4 of the wheat you would ordinarily use. Because of the wheat shortage, they also needed to raise less livestock, which is why they needed to do meatless days every single week. Oatmeal is something that you can find in most kitchens these days, and I do eat it often. But stewed prunes is something I've never tried before, and so I was very interested and intrigued by this recipe. And I was very shocked at how much those prunes plumped up. You basically just get them to a boil and then simmer them long enough for the liquid to become almost syrup-like. And there was no other cream or sugar needed in this oatmeal. I'm also having tea on the side. I'm free to use as much milk or cream as I want, but I'm only using 1 cube of sugar in my tea because there is a limited supply. Trying something new like this, you always have to really take a few minutes to gather yourself and see what you think. And I actually really enjoyed these stewed prunes. I would definitely make them again. They were delicately sweet, but not so sweet as brown sugar. And so I found it quite refreshing. I decided to use an exact lunch menu from Monday out of How to Plan Meals in Wartime. We'll be making Japanese eggs, which are basically just poached eggs served over a border of rice. I'm getting the rice started. We'll also be serving this with toast and then baked bananas. And this is a really interesting recipe. You need to use underripe bananas, and we'll be cooking them on a lower temperature, basted with a sauce of butter, sugar, and lemon juice. The suggested menu plan for lunch is one substantial dish accompanied by a vegetable, bread and butter, fruit, or another simple dessert. I'm only just realizing that there was no vegetable with this particular meal plan, but this was a meal plan from the same booklet. So I'm getting started with the sauce for the baked bananas. And I just found this very kind of intriguing as to how these bananas were going to turn out. From what I can gather from these booklets, there were no food stamps or ration cards like in World War II. But it was your duty as a patriot to comply with these rules and suggestions. Hoarding and overeating were both two no-nos during this time period. You were not to have any more than anyone else. And it was recommended to serve small portions so that everyone cleaned their plates. Now, I am making poached eggs, which I am not good at. I don't make poached eggs. And so these did not turn out great. To my embarrassment, they look horrible, but I'm sure that they will be edible. I usually make fried eggs or over easy or scrambled, but poached is not in my repertoire, we'll say. And I actually looked this up on YouTube before I made them, and I still didn't do it right. It was very important that we were going to keep those centers jiggly because that is going to be our sauce because we are not using any condiments. Bread was served pretty much with every single meal, and it was to be used freely according to your desire or economy. Now, I wasn't quite sure about the portioning here, so I just kind of wung it. But one of the interesting things to note here is that I wasn't really hungry. That breakfast was so filling that I just had to make the lunch because it was already getting past 1 o'clock and it was becoming late. And so I was, not very hungry for this meal, we'll just say. I'm seasoning with salt and pepper, and the bananas are still cooking, and I'm getting my bread and butter ready. And I considered the bananas were going to be a dessert with this meal. So we'll see what happens in a minute. But one of the things that I want to say is that one of the things that shocked me about this meal plan was how much food they actually ate during a scarce time and during a worldwide emergency. I was kind of stunned because I don't eat this much food in my own everyday, and yet I am overweight. So it really shocked me. And yet, this is before the rise of processed foods. And so it leads me to believe that if we ate more natural foods like they did, we could eat a lot more without the stress and anxiety that we have about eating. As I began to eat this meal, I realized that it tasted quite bland, and I was craving something else on the side. And so I decided that I needed to go and get those bananas. I got this recipe online as it wasn't in the booklet. My guess is that this was just a basic recipe that most women already knew how to make, and so they didn't need to have a recipe in the book. So I needed to get this onto my plate to feel like there was something else going on here, and I was so surprised with my first bite. So interesting. It actually didn't taste like bananas at all. My first thought was potato, but actually it reminded me more of a dumpling in texture and in flavor with a tanginess and sweet and sour flavor of that sauce. It was just so good, and it added exactly what I needed to kick this meal up a notch. As I got to the end of my plate, it got harder and harder to finish. I was so full, I was stuffed, and I really had to push myself to finish, but it was a no-no to not empty your plate during World War One. And in fact, housewives were encouraged to make the food as pleasing and beautiful as they possibly could so that their recipients would want to eat everything on their plate. It was also recommended to have small portions, and I think mine was a bit much. Several hours have passed since lunch, and I'm working on a custard. Now, this was a bit of a cheat because I'm using the custard and custard recipe from this can that I got at the grocery store. However, I've done a lot of cooking today and I needed a little bit of a cheat. So Anyhow, I'm getting this started. I'm getting it up to a boil, and then I'll be putting this aside. I found it interesting that they still had desserts even during World War I, and they also ate a lot of fruit. And this is something that I want to strive for in my own regular diet, and I'm inspired by this menu planning. And I really think it could improve my own health. One of the things that I want to note here is that I had so much energy after that lunch, and I didn't feel bloated or anything like that. I just felt sort of this fire burning within me, which is so funny because that's how they describe food as fuel. And I definitely felt that. So tonight we're making a Boston roast with kidney beans. Mine are just red beans. That's all I could find. And we are going to be mashing this into sort of a paste and adding the other ingredients. To the beans, we're adding a tablespoon of chopped onion, 3 teaspoons of salt, 1 cup of dried breadcrumbs, 2 cups of grated cheese, and a half a cup of water or stock. And I reserved the bean liquid for this purpose. So we're going to get this all mixed together. And in my mind, there's not a lot of, let's just say, seasonings in here. So I'm kind of interested to see how this is going to work. And my only hope is that the cheese makes it delicious. I fully greased and lined my pan with parchment, knowing there was a high likelihood of this sticking because of the cheese. So I'm getting this whole mixture into a bread pan, and this is going to cook at 350 for 1 hour. For my dinner, we are going to be having the Boston roast with a brown nut sauce, steamed broccoli, bread and butter, and custard for dessert. Now, this original meal plan was also supposed to come with a cream of celery soup, but I just didn't want to do that much work. But once mealtime came, I actually regretted that decision because I feel like the soup would have rounded out the meal. For the general plan of meals, which is in How to Plan Meals in Wartime, they give a breakfast, lunch, and dinner recommendation so that you can plan your own meals based on this. So for dinner, we need to have either a meat or a suitable substitute, potatoes or a suitable substitute, a green vegetable, bread and butter, and a dessert. I had to find the recipe for the brown nut sauce. Now, this sauce was not recommended to go with the Boston roast. It was just a sauce that I saw in one of these booklets. And so I had to look for it. And you make sort of a cream sauce with the butter and flour, but you add peanut butter to the mix. And then instead of adding milk, you add stock. Now, this was an experiment. I was hoping that would go well. Sorry about how dark all of this is. I soon end up turning a light on because it's getting really hard to see. I have to say I quite enjoy doing things by candlelight. However, it does make it a little bit hard to film. So we're getting closer and closer to this meal being ready. The broccoli is steamed, and I'm just going to pop these rolls in the oven really quickly. My daughter and I made this molasses bread recipe from a World War II cookbook, and it's absolutely delicious. And you can also use the same recipe for rolls, which is what we did. It is just myself and my two daughters eating here tonight, and I was excited to share this meal with them to get their insight of what they thought about it as well. So I'm taking this Boston roast out of the oven, and I'm curious to see if it's going to hold together. And I was pleasantly surprised. I have made a lot of vegetarian meatloafs in my life because I used to be vegetarian, and I've never seen one hold together as well as this one did. So the cheese really did work as a binder, and there were no eggs needed. I was a lot more mindful about the portions this time because I realized that I could probably have cut my portions in half from what I thought I needed. And that was a very interesting thing because, we just get used to having a certain amount on our plate. But I felt like with this way of eating, especially with all the bread, it is just so filling that you don't really need as much food. And I have to say that I feel really good about eating this bread because we actually went to a granary that's local to us that sells organic grains, and we bought organic wheat from them. And this bread is about 80% whole wheat that we ground ourselves. So there's a lot of B vitamins and other good nutrition in there that is stripped during the process of flour making in the factories, and we're getting all of that nutrition. Now, my one daughter, who has a bit of a sense of humor, said that this looked like jail food or something you would eat in a psych ward, which I found absolutely hilarious. And I was laughing my head off because she was probably right. But in all honesty, the loaf was actually not bad, but I did not really like the sauce. If I could have used more of a gravy flavor, I think it would have gone better. The peanut butter flavor was a throw off, so I didn't really like that. And I think I really truly would make the loaf again, but I would add a lot more flavor and seasoning to it. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments if you would like a follow-up video with maybe the poor peasant meals for the low-cost families, because I think that would be really fun. If you're new to my channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I share videos every single Wednesday, and I share homemaking, food from scratch, and I love historical recipes.